They're an interesting bunch, aren't they? We know a little bit about them. We hear these little pieces of stories about them now and then. And so in a sense, as we hear more about these people, and we hear their names over and over, we kind of get to know them. Or at least we get to know a little bit about them. You know, we hear Peter a lot. Peter's name comes up because he shines in a lot of stories, and he's kind of this impetuous guy who speaks out, and we hear him a lot. Jesus gives him a name. You know, he calls him Rock, which would be pretty cool if somebody gave you the name Rock. So, I mean, we kind of know some things about Peter. We know some things about James and John. They're named the Sons of Thunder. I think that'd be a cool name to have, Son of Thunder. We know a little bit about like Matthew, tax collector, Matthew. We know a couple of fishermen. And then there's a few that we don't ever hear about. You know, Thaddeus and Bartholomew and some of these others that we're like, I don't know who they are. But they were part of this group. And then there's Thomas. And we all know Thomas because Thomas has a nickname. And it is? Right. He gets the nickname Doubting Thomas, which we all know. Like, that's a tough nickname. I mean, would you want to be called Doubting your name? I mean, that's kind of harsh, isn't it? One episode, one little mistake, one statement, one moment, and he gets this reputation of being a doubter. I mean, that's like all we pretty much know about Thomas. He gets the doubting name. So I'm on a campaign. Maybe you'll join me in this campaign after today. I'm on a campaign to give Thomas a new nickname. Okay. I think we should come to his aid because we need to improve his reputation. So I'm on a campaign to give Thomas a new nickname, and it is Honest Thomas. So, if you'll join the campaign with me, we'll see, you can be the judge in a little while, but Honest Thomas, I actually think would be a more fitting name for this disciple because of what he does. And his episode of being honest, I think teaches us a lot of really neat things about how to live with the faith that God gives us to live with. So, let's jump into Thomas's story. Thomas's story comes after Jesus is raised from the dead. So this is one of these episodes that we've been looking at for the last few weeks. These episodes that are like the last episodes in the gospel stories. The whole story happens, Jesus is raised from the dead, people find the empty tomb, and then there are like these smattering of little episodes and conversations and encounters and other things that happen right before the story ends. It's like what we're left with in these last little things before the story's over. Thomas' story is one of these last but not least sorts of episodes. So in Thomas' situation, this is where the people have gone to the tomb, they found it empty. Mary Magdalene, at least in this version of the story, is the one who goes to the tomb. She finds it empty. She encounters Jesus just after, realizes it's him. She runs back to the group of disciples, and she tells them all this. They get super excited about this. But there's one person not there, and that's Thomas. So that's where we kind of pick up Thomas' story. And here's how the story goes. One of the 12 disciples, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, was not with the others when Jesus came. They told him, "We have seen the Lord!" But he replied, "I won't believe it unless I see the nail wounds in his hands, put my fingers into them, and place my hand into the wound in his side." 8 days later, the disciples were together again, and this time Thomas was with them. The doors were locked, but suddenly, as before, Jesus was standing among them. "Peace be with you," he said. Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and look at my hands. Put your hand into the wound in my side. Don't be faithless any longer. Believe." "My Lord and my God," Thomas exclaimed. Then Jesus told him, "You believe because you've seen me. Blessed are those who believe without seeing me." But who doesn't like this story? I mean, this is an excellent plot. We've got vivid characters, we've got a big problem going on, and then we get this really cool solution, all within just a few minutes. This is a great story. So, what does Thomas do with his doubt? Or, what do we do with our doubt? So, let's look at Thomas. And one way of looking at Thomas is, let's look at the room that he was in. Let's take the temperature of the room that he was in. First, in the room, we know Mary Magdalene is there. She was the one, remember, who went to the tomb. She came back, she told everybody. So we know at least Mary is in the room. We also know that Mary, when she was at the tomb, she ran to get the two other disciples. That was Peter and John. So Peter and John, we know, are in the room also. We know that they came back to the room and told the disciples. That's what the story earlier says. Now, we don't know if that means the 11 disciples or a bigger group. Let's be conservative. Let's just say the 11 disciples. So at least they were there. And then, at least from the Gospel of Luke, we know that this was a bigger gathering. There was a gathering of not just Mary and the 11. We know that there was a bigger group of followers. They called them disciples. They were followers. And we know there was some sort of a bigger group. So we have a bigger group of people who are in this room. And when they then see Jesus, when Jesus appears to them, of course they get totally excited. They tell Thomas about it. And what's Thomas's response? Unless I see it for myself, unless I put my finger there, unless I put my hand there, I won't believe it. He wants to have the exact same experience that all the disciples just had. Word for word, sense for sense, he wants the same live experience that they had. If they saw Jesus and believed, he should be able to see Jesus and equally believe. He said, if I'm going to believe, I want the same exact experience. So it's interesting what he says. When he describes all these things, it's super poetic how this line is written. He doesn't say, I'm not going to believe unless. We reverse the order because it sounds better for our language, but he actually says, unless I put my finger there, unless I put my hand there, I will not believe. It's like John is stringing us along. Unless this happens, unless this happens, unless this happens, I will not believe. It's a strong doubt. It is dig your heels in, a resolved doubt. I am not going to believe until or unless this all happens. So we've got a big doubt. And I think if we look at the room, we also have a very big doubt. Remember, who's all here? We've got Mary, we've got disciples, the larger group of disciples. It's 30, 40, 50, 80. We don't know exactly how many people, but it's a big group. And they're all, we saw Jesus and believe. And then there's Thomas on the other side. He's standing his ground against all these people that he knows, he's known for a while, he trusts, he's traveled with, he's eaten with, he's spent time with. His doubt must have been solid for him to stand his ground against all of them and all of that. And that's the great thing about Thomas. He's honest. He's honest about his doubt. He's willing to stand up that much and say, this is how I feel. This is what I'm thinking. This is what I believe. And that's just how I am. And if anything's going to change that, it better be equally as big, because I'm just being honest. I love that Thomas gives us permission to be honest. Honest about our faith, honest about our confusion, honest about how things are going or not going. It's okay to be honest. Jesus can take it. And I'm also glad that's not where the story ends. It keeps going. Because next we find, what does Jesus do? Thomas is the one who is absent. And so Jesus appears into the room in the exact same way, with the exact same sequence, with the exact same activity as the disciples just experienced. Which, remember, is exactly what he required. What he said, unless all these things happen, unless it looks exactly like the disciples, I will not believe. And Jesus shows up, and Jesus says exactly what the disciples experienced. The Italian Baroque painter, Caravaggio, he's probably the one who painted the most famous painting of this very moment of Thomas. We could probably interpret this painting for hours. Look at the intensity. Jesus, Thomas in the foreground, a couple disciples looking on, hidden behind. But look who's acting. Jesus grabs his hand. Jesus puts it where it needs to go. Jesus isn't hesitating. Jesus isn't being cautious. Jesus is taking charge of Thomas's doubt. And he's addressing it head on. There's no shame there. There's no saying you should think this. Jesus is saying, I want you to experience everything that you need to experience. And that's how the story goes in the gospel also. Jesus doesn't wait for Thomas to ask a question. Jesus just shows up in the room and he starts talking. And he says, Thomas, come here. Do this. Feel this. Touch this. Jesus takes charge of Thomas's faith. If Jesus can take charge of us, if Jesus can take charge of our situations, if Jesus can take charge of our confusion or our doubt and anything that's just not quite right, Jesus can take charge. That's the kind of Jesus that shows up. So, what's this whole story all about? What's the outcome? What's the goal? What's the result of what happens at the end of this? Where is Jesus going with all this? It's actually described throughout the whole passage. It's described in several places. It's peppered throughout there. This is all about belief. For them, in their language, it's the same word. Faith and belief, belief and faith, it's all one word. We've got multiple words. We kind of think of it a little differently. It's all one word to them. Faith and belief, belief and faith, it's the same thing. So, is faith a noun or a verb? I mean, think about how we use it. We often talk about, she has a strong faith. It's like a container, a strong faith. Or they've really grown in their faith. I mean, that's a noun. And it's something that we can develop. It's a thing we can hold. It's a thing that can fill us. It's a thing that we can trust in. It's a noun. And the Bible describes faith as a noun in different places. The woman who Jesus healed, your faith has made you well. So, faith is a noun. But if it's only a noun, then that's just something that we hold on to and we look at and we can grow, but it's there. Throughout the Bible, faith is also described many times as a verb. How does Jesus use faith, believing, faith, same thing? It's action, it's a verb, it's moving, it's active, it's something that works. He's describing that faith is something that accomplishes and moves and does things. It's an activity. And the Bible describes that also in other places. In fact, John, who wrote this episode, John only uses faith in a verb way. He doesn't use faith in a noun way. He only uses faith in a verb way. And John uses faith as a verb 3 times more than Matthew, Mark, and Luke all combined together. It's like for John, it's all about active, living, moving faith. And so for Jesus, it's not just about faith as a thing. We could say it's about faithing. It's about moving. It's about doing. It's about working. It's about employing. It's about moving ahead and stepping in with our faith. That's what faithing can be. So why does this story last? I mean, we've been talking about these last stories. This is one of the last stories. It comes after the resurrection. Why is it one of the last stories? Because it's talking about us in these sort of last types of moments. It's talking about us. In the last line that it describes in the passage, blessed are those who believe without seeing me. See, they were in the phase and in the moment where they could see and they believed. Mary Magdalene, she saw Jesus and she believed. She took it back to the disciples. The disciples saw Jesus and they believed. Thomas didn't at first, but then he saw Jesus and he believed. But at some point, he was going to have to move from seeing Jesus and believing to not seeing Jesus, but still believing. And Jesus is saying, you don't have to see to believe. You have to faith to believe. And it's that activity of faithing that leads us to be able to believe. What's that super famous passage about faith in the book of Hebrews? Faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance of what we do not see. We don't see Jesus in the same way that they saw Jesus. But we can still live with our faith active to be able to see the work of Jesus in us and around us. May we not just have faith, but may we be faithing as we strive to follow Jesus. Would you pray with me?